She thought he was just a stranger, until her grandchild spoke his name. Whispers across stars, the crystal spires of Elthor's capital city, Luminara, refracted the twin suns' light in prismatic patterns across Elder Nilara's chambers. She stood at the edge of her balcony, her delicate purple skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that revealed her elevated status among the Lumari. 300 cycles of life had granted her wisdom and respect, but also the burden of protecting her people's traditions from outside influence. Elder, the human delegation has arrived, announced Soren, her trusted advisor. His voice carried the subtle harmonic undertone typical of their species. Nilara's inner eyelids flickered in annoyance. Another diplomatic mission? The council grows too eager for trade agreements. This one is different, Soren replied. He's come alone, a researcher named Jace Meriden, seeking cultural exchange rather than resources. They always claim noble intentions, Nilara said, her luminous patterns darkening with skepticism. But I've yet to meet a human whose curiosity didn't mask ambition. Nevertheless, protocol demanded she receive the visitor. The Lumari had maintained cautious relations with humans since first contact 50 cycles ago. Peace was preserved through strict boundaries and limited interaction. Boundaries Nilara had fought fiercely to maintain. After what happened to her daughter Lyra, the Great Hall's crystalline architecture amplified sound in ways that confused most off-worlders. But the human standing at its center seemed unusually composed. Jace Meriden was tall for his species, with deep brown skin and eyes that reflected the hall's iridescence with unusual clarity. Elder Nilara, he bowed in the traditional Lumari fashion, hands open at his sides. Thank you for receiving me. Nilara inclined her head slightly. Your request for extended study is unusual, Researcher Meriden. Please call me Jace, he replied with a smile that seemed oddly familiar. My interest in Lumari history is personal as much as academic. Personal? Nilara's bioluminescence flickered with suspicion. How so? Before he could answer, the hall's entrance shimmered as a small figure darted through. Nilara's granddaughter Tari, barely 6 cycles old, had escaped her caretaker again. Her skin glowed with the soft lavender hue of youth, patterns still forming and undefined. Grandmother, she called, voice tinkling like crystal chimes. Then she stopped, noticing the stranger. Nilara moved to intercept the child, but froze when Tari suddenly rushed toward Jace with recognition lighting her features. Kova, she exclaimed joyfully, using a Lumari term reserved for a beloved family friend. You came back! The hall fell silent. Jace stared at the child with undisguised shock, then looked up at Nilara with equal confusion. I don't understand, he stammered. But Nilara's mind was racing. Tari had never met this human. Yet something in his features had triggered recognition. The shape of his eyes, perhaps, or the way he held himself, reminiscent of someone else. Someone from long ago. Tari, return to your chambers, Nilara commanded, her voice sharper than intended. But grandmother, now, child. As Tari reluctantly obeyed, Nilara studied the human more carefully. How long did you say you've studied our people, Researcher Meriden? 3 years by Earth standard, he answered, still watching the child's retreat. This is my first visit to Elthor. Then how does my granddaughter know you? Nilara's patterns shifted to interrogative mode, a subtle threat that most humans wouldn't recognize. But Jace seemed to understand. I don't know. I'm looking for answers myself. He hesitated, then added, about a friend who visited here 7 years ago and never returned. His name was Eli Kieran. The name struck Nilara like a physical blow. Her luminescence dimmed momentarily, a rare loss of control that didn't escape Jace's notice. You knew him, Jace said, not a question. Memories Nilara had buried resurfaced. Her daughter Lyra's secret affair with a human explorer, the scandal she had concealed to protect her family's standing, and the mysterious circumstances of Lyra's disappearance after giving birth to Tari. Your friend is long gone, she said coldly, and you would be wise to follow his example. But as she turned away, Nilara knew the patterns of fate had already begun to shift. The resemblance between Jace and the child's absent father was too striking to ignore, and too dangerous to acknowledge. Forbidden memories. The ancient memory crystals pulsed with a soft blue glow as Nilara pressed her palm against their faceted surface. Few Lumari still practiced this old form of record-keeping, but she had always been a traditionalist, until her daughter Lyra had challenged everything she believed. Show me Eli Kieran, she whispered. The crystals flared, projecting images that hadn't been viewed in 7 cycles. A human with kind eyes and a curious smile, standing beside Lyra in the sacred gardens. Nylara remembered the day she'd discovered them there and the terrible argument that followed. Elder? Soren's voice interrupted her thoughts. The human is requesting another audience. 3 days had passed since Jace Meriden's arrival, and despite her orders to restrict his movements, he'd already won over several council members with his respectful knowledge of Lumari customs. Let him wait, she replied, but returned to her official chambers nonetheless. When Jace entered, Nylara noticed dark circles beneath his eyes, evidence that humans required more rest than her species. Yet there was determination in his stance. Elder Nylara, I've been patient, he said without preamble, but your people's evasion regarding Eli Kieran suggests something happened that you're concealing. Our internal affairs are not your concern, she replied coldly. A man disappeared. Jace countered. My friend, if you know something, grandmother. Tari's voice interrupted as she bounded into the room, followed by her flustered caretaker. The child stopped before Jace, studying him with uncanny intensity. You have the same eyes as in Mother's crystals. Nylara felt a chill spread through her luminescent patterns. What crystals, child? The hidden ones, with Mother and the other human. Tari turned to Jace. But you're not him. Tari, enough, Nylara commanded, but Jace had already knelt to the child's level. Who was he? He asked gently. Tari's imagination is quite active, Nylara interjected. Her mother disappeared shortly after her birth. She fabricates stories to fill the void. Something in Jace's expression changed. A flash of recognition. When exactly did Lyra disappear? The question hung in the air, dangerous in its precision. 7 cycles ago, Nylara admitted reluctantly, shortly after a human delegation departed. The same time Eli vanished, Jace whispered, then looked directly at Tari. And how old are you? Before Nylara could intervene, Tari proudly held up her hands. 6 1/4 cycles. The implication hung between them, undeniable. They left together, Jace realized. Didn't they? Nylara dismissed Tari and her caretaker before responding. When they were alone, her luminescence dimmed to almost nothing, a sign of deep distress among her kind. What I tell you cannot leave this room, she said finally. Eli Kieran and my daughter formed a forbidden attachment. When I discovered it, I ordered him to leave Elthor forever. But they had already conceived a child, Jace finished. Tari, a hybrid. The first of her kind. Nylara's patterns flared with old anger. Do you understand what that meant for my family's standing? For Lyra's future? For our people's genetic purity? Yet you raised Tari as your own. She is my blood, Nylara said simply. But Lyra, after the birth, she was different, distant. One night, she simply vanished. I assumed she had followed Eli to Earth. Jace shook his head slowly. Eli never returned home. His last communication mentioned a discovery in the Forbidden Valleys, something about ancient Lumari history that contradicted official records. Nylara stiffened. The valleys are restricted for good reason. The radiation affects humans differently than Lumari, Jace finished. Yes, I've studied the phenomenon. That's partly why I'm here. Their eyes met in a moment of mutual understanding. Whatever had happened to Lyra and Eli, the truth lay somewhere in the mysterious valleys that had been quarantined for generations. If they went there... Nylara didn't finish the sentence. The implications were too painful. I need to see her personal quarters, Jace said. Any clues Lyra might have left. Against her better judgment, Nylara nodded. As they walked through the crystalline corridors, she noticed how Jace studied the architecture with genuine appreciation, rather than merely scientific curiosity. In this small way, he reminded her of Eli, and perhaps this was why her granddaughter had recognized something familiar in him. Lyra's chambers had remained untouched, a shrine to Nylara's grief and hope. Inside, among her daughter's belongings, Jace discovered something that changed everything. A star map with coordinates marked in both Lumari and human notation, pointing to a location deep within the Forbidden Valleys. And beside it, a note in Lyra's flowing script. The truth must be known, Mother. Forgive me. Fractured Truth's dawn broke over Luminara, casting rainbow refractions through the city's crystal towers. In the privacy of her meditation chamber, Nylara faced the most difficult decision of her 3 centuries of life. The Council will never approve an expedition to the Forbidden Valleys, Soren warned, his luminescent patterns displaying concern, especially not with a human. Which is why the Council will not be informed, Nylara replied, securing a portable communication crystal to her wrist. As Elder, I have the authority to conduct independent research. This goes beyond research, Nylara. Soren rarely addressed her without title, a measure of their long friendship. If rumors about your granddaughter's heritage spread, combined with your sudden departure with this human, then you will ensure such rumors are contained, she said firmly. Tari's safety depends on it. Nearby, Jace was preparing his own equipment, carefully checking the radiation shield he'd modified for the journey. 3 days of investigation had yielded troubling discoveries. Records of Eli's research had been systematically removed from Lumari archives, and the official explanation for the valley's restriction contained inconsistencies. Ready? He asked as Nylara approached. She nodded, though uncertainty clouded her usually decisive mind. In just 7 days, this human had disrupted the carefully ordered existence she'd maintained since Lyra's disappearance. More disturbing still was how she'd begun to see Tari differently. Noticing human traits she'd previously ignored, the child's curious nature, her emotional expressiveness, her ability to adapt to light that would blind pure Lumari. Before we leave, Nylara said, there's something you should know. The Forbidden Valleys weren't always forbidden. They contain ruins of our earliest civilization before we evolved our crystalline adaptations. Jace's eyes widened. That contradicts every historical account I've studied. History written by the victors often does, she replied bitterly. My ancestors, the Crystal Elders, established our current social order after a civil war. The valley's inhabitants refused integration. They were, she hesitated, different. Different how? They maintained diplomatic relations with other species, including early human explorers. Understanding dawned on Jace's face. You're saying human Lumari contact predates official records by millennia, Nylara confirmed. And any evidence of genetic compatibility would undermine the foundation of our separatist policies. Which is exactly what Tari represents, Jace concluded, and what Eli must have discovered. Their journey to the valleys required stealth, using an obsolete transport crystal that wouldn't register on official monitoring systems. They traveled through the night, crossing the phosphorescent forests that marked the boundary between civilized Elthor and its forgotten territories. By midday, the landscape had transformed dramatically. Crystal formations gave way to organic structures, trees with trunks of twisted copper and leaves that absorbed rather than reflected light. The air carried unfamiliar scents, earthy and complex. The radiation readings are unusual, Jace noted, studying his instruments. Not dangerous, just different. Almost as if... It's not radiation at all, Nylara finished, her scientific training asserting itself. It's a different energy signature entirely. They continued in silence until reaching the edge of a vast depression in the land. Below, partially overgrown with strange vegetation, lay the ruins of an ancient city, not crystalline like Luminara, but constructed of materials that seemed to blend organic and metallic elements. And at its center stood a structure that remained largely intact, a massive dome of swirling colors, neither solid nor liquid. The Temple of Confluence, Nylara whispered, recalling forbidden texts she'd read in her youth, where different species once shared knowledge and connection. As they descended toward the ruins, Jace's communication device suddenly activated, displaying a message that made his blood run cold. Jace, if you're receiving this, you've found the path. Don't trust official channels. The hybridization wasn't an accident but a rediscovery. We're continuing the work at the hidden settlement. Bring Nylara if possible. She deserves the truth. And tell Tari her father misses her. Eli Nylara stared at the message, her luminescence fluctuating wildly between hope and disbelief. They're alive, Jace said softly. Both of them. Before Nylara could respond, movement caught their attention. From the temple emerged a group of figures, some unmistakably Lumari, others human, and several who appeared to be something in between. Their leader stepped forward, her purple skin bearing familiar patterns, though altered with stripes of golden luminescence that no pure Lumari could produce. Mother, Lyra called, her voice carrying across the ancient ruins. "We've been waiting for you." Across boundaries, the hidden settlement beneath the Temple of Confluence defied everything Nylara had believed about her world. Nestled within a vast underground cavern, structures of living crystal grew alongside earthen dwellings. Children, some purple-skinned with human eyes, others human with subtle luminescent patterns, played freely in communal spaces. 7 years, Lyra said as she guided her mother and Jace through winding pathways. Her once purely purple skin now featured golden streaks that pulsed with emotion. 7 years building a truth they tried to erase from history. "Who is they?" Jace asked, documenting everything with careful attention. "The crystal elders who preceded you, Mother," Lyra explained. "The historical purge wasn't just about maintaining genetic purity. It was about power. Hybridization threatened their control because it created beings who could thrive in both worlds. Nylara's luminescence dimmed with shame. I enforced those same prejudices when I discovered you with Eli. You were protecting me from what you believed was true," Lyra replied gently. "But look around. The radiation sickness that supposedly affects human Lumari offspring. A fabrication. The genetic incompatibility? Another lie. They entered a structure that served as a research center. Inside, a human man with graying temples looked up from complex holograms. Despite the years, Nylara immediately recognized Eli Kieran. "You made it," he said, embracing Jace like a brother. When he turned to Nylara, his expression became solemn. "Elder, I hope our sudden reunion isn't unwelcome." "You took my daughter," Nylara said, her voice tight with conflicting emotions. "I chose to come," Lyra interjected. "After Tari was born, I discovered records in the ancient archives, records you didn't have access to as Elder. They revealed the truth. Human-Lumari relations date back to our earliest history. Eli projected a series of genetic models. The Crystal Elder regime didn't just discourage hybridization, they engineered Lumari physiology to make it appear dangerous and unviable. But we've been reversing that process. We're restoring our original genetic patterns," Lyra explained, returning to what Lumari were before the separation. Nylara stared at the evidence before her, decades of scientific training wrestling with centuries of cultural indoctrination. "You left Tari behind," she said finally, her true pain surfacing. Lyra's luminescence flickered with sorrow. "The most difficult decision of my life. But she needed to be raised within Lumari society, to be living proof that hybrids could thrive there. I knew you would protect her, Mother, regardless of your beliefs." "And now?" Jace asked. "What's your plan?" "Revelation," Eli said simply. "It's time for both our peoples to know the truth." That night, unable to sleep, Nylara wandered to an observation deck overlooking the cavern. The settlement below pulsed with harmonious light. Lumari luminescence synchronized with human-designed illumination in a dance that symbolized their integration. She sensed rather than heard Jace approach. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" he said, standing beside her. "Everything you believed, challenged in a single day." "Not everything," she replied softly. "I always believed my daughter was extraordinary. I just feared where that extraordinariness would lead. And now? Now I understand that fear itself was the enemy." She turned to him, studying his features in the dim light. "You risked everything to find your friend. Why?" Jace smiled faintly. "Eli wasn't just my research partner. He was the first to suggest that different species might achieve more together than apart. I thought him idealistic, until now." Their conversation continued through the night, two beings from different worlds finding unexpected connection through shared purpose and growing respect. As dawn approached, though indistinguishable underground, Nylara realized something had changed within her. The rigid boundaries she'd maintained throughout her life had begun to dissolve. "We should return to Luminara," she said eventually. "Tari deserves to know her parents live. And I have a responsibility to begin preparing our people for the truth." "The Council will resist," Jace cautioned. "Perhaps, Nylara's luminescence strengthened with resolve. But I've upheld traditions based on falsehoods long enough. It's time to create new traditions founded on truth. As they prepared to leave, Lyra embraced her mother. We'll follow in 3 days' time, she promised. Just long enough to gather our research and prepare the others. Eli added, the revelation must be handled delicately. Too much too quickly could cause the very conflict we hoped to prevent. Their return journey to Luminara was filled with meaningful silence, both processing the implications of what they'd discovered and planning for what lay ahead. Yet beneath these practical concerns, Nylara found herself increasingly aware of Jace's presence. His intelligence, courage, and openness to understanding her world awakened feelings she had long suppressed. As the crystal spires of the capital came into view, Jace spoke the concern they both shared. Are you ready to challenge everything your society believes? Nylara's luminescence pulsed with newfound certainty. With the right allies, yes. Their hands briefly touched, a simple gesture that crossed the final boundary between their worlds. New constellations. The Great Hall of Luminara, usually a place of serene formality, crackled with tension. The full Council of Elders had assembled at Nylara's unprecedented summons, their luminescent patterns betraying confusion and suspicion. Elder Nylara, Council Leader Vex began, your unexplained absence and this emergency session require explanation. Nylara stood at the center of the chamber, Jace beside her. Despite whispers of disapproval at a human's presence in their sacred space, she remained composed. Honored Council, she began, for centuries, we have based our policies and beliefs on a fundamental assumption, that Lumari and humans are separate evolutionary paths, never meant to converge. She activated the ancient memory crystal recovered from the settlement, projecting images that caused gasps throughout the hall, historical records of early human-Lumari cooperation, genetic studies proving compatibility, and finally images of the thriving hybrid community. We've been deceived, she continued, her voice steady. Not by malice, but by fear. Fear that integration would diminish what makes us Lumari. I shared that fear once. But what I've witnessed suggests the opposite, that connection strengthens rather than weakens. The council erupted in protest until Vex raised his hand for silence. These claims are extraordinary, Elder Nylara. But even if true, why risk the stability of our society? Because of Tari, she answered simply, gesturing to her granddaughter who waited at the chamber's edge. And all the children like her. As if on cue, the hall's entrance shimmered. Lyra entered, accompanied by Eli and several members of their community, living proof of what Nylara claimed. The reunion between Tari and her parents brought tears to even the most stoic elder's eyes. The child's joyous recognition of her father, the source of her inexplicable connection to Jace, silenced further objections. What followed were days of intense deliberation. The council reviewed evidence, questioned the settlement residents, and gradually accepted the historical truth. But practical questions remained. How would their societies integrate after centuries of separation? What would this mean for Lumari traditions? Throughout this process, Nylara found herself increasingly turning to Jace for perspective, and he to her. Their collaboration evolved into something neither had anticipated, a deep connection transcending professional respect. One evening, as they reviewed diplomatic protocols for the formal announcement to Earth authorities, Jace paused their work. When this is finished, he said quietly, I'll need to return to Earth as liaison. Nylara's luminescence dimmed involuntarily. Of course, your work here will be complete, but my reasons for staying wouldn't be. His hand covered hers, a gesture now familiar between them. Unless those reasons aren't sufficient. What reasons would those be, Researcher Meriden? She asked, her formal tone betrayed by brightening patterns. The usual human ones, he smiled. Curiosity, wonder, discovery. He hesitated. Love. The word hung between them, as monumental as any revelation they'd uncovered. I never expected, Nylara began. Neither did I, Jace admitted. But perhaps that's the point of all this, that the most profound discoveries happen when we abandon expectations. They're kiss-bridged more than physical differences. It united life experiences, separated by centuries and light years, proving what the settlement had already demonstrated. That connection was possible across every boundary. 3 months later, the formal unification ceremony between human and Lumari representatives took place at the restored Temple of Confluence. The settlement, no longer hidden, had become a symbol of possibility. As Elder, Nylara led the proceedings, her luminescence radiating with unprecedented brilliance. Beside her stood Jace, recently appointed as Earth's first ambassador to Elthor. Tari, reunited with both her biological parents and still adored by her grandmother, participated as junior cultural liaison, a position created especially for her. From this day forward, Nylara proclaimed to the assembled dignitaries, we recognize not separation but connection as our guiding principle. The stars that once divided our worlds now form constellations that unite us. Later, as celebration continued around them, Nylara and Jace stood at the temple's highest point, overlooking the valley now flourishing with new construction. A true blending of both worlds' architecture and purpose. Your daughter asked when we're making it official, Jace mentioned casually. Nylara's patterns rippled with amusement. Lyra always was impatient. She has a point, he said. Why maintain one final boundary when we've crossed all others? Nylara turned to him, 3 centuries of wisdom in her eyes alongside the newfound light of love. Perhaps because some crossings deserve special consideration. I've considered for 94 days, Jace replied, counting in Lumari fashion. Isn't that sufficient? Her laughter, rare before his arrival in her life, sparkled like crystal chimes. For a human, perhaps. But I've lived 300 years. Surely you can grant me one more day to prepare. One day, he agreed, drawing her close, and then a lifetime of new discoveries together. Above them, the twin suns of Elthor set behind distant mountains, while the first stars appeared, forming patterns neither human nor Lumari astronomers had named. New constellations in a shared sky, marking the beginning of a unified future that neither world could have achieved alone. In the soft twilight, their silhouettes merged, 2 beings from different worlds who had found, against all odds and historical barriers, that love indeed transcended the boundaries of species, tradition, and stars.